Good evening, YouTube friends. I'm coming today with part 2 of my discussion of the pen premiums from the 1930s. Part 1 dealt with the items that are under the R314 umbrella, or the National Chicall fine pens. If you haven't checked out that video, definitely recommend that you check it out. And part 2 will be a discussion of the cards that fall under the R314 Wide Pen umbrella. Now, like I discussed last time in the video regarding the fine pens, is that when the catalog designations were created, a lot of times things that looked similar and were believed to be made by the same manufacturers and distributed in the same way oftentimes just got lumped together under the same catalog designation, occasionally being separated out under different types. The wide pens are also an example of that, whereas under the R314 designation there are classified as 5 types of cards under there. Now these 5 types are actually 4 or 5, depending on your interpretation, different sets that were created by either Goudey or their Canadian branch of the company, Worldwide Gum, and distributed over a period of 3 different years. And while each of these sets has its own unique characteristics and checklist, they all get classified under just the one catalog designation with that R314. I'll give you a little bit of information about each of these different types, some information about the individual characteristics of each type that can help you in identifying each one. Now, of these 5, type 1 is the most common, followed by type 4, which is just slightly less common than type 1. And then after that there is a bit of a drop off in how difficult they can be to find in type 2 and type 3. And then the most rare of the 5 types, and definitely the most difficult to find, is the type 5. Now, if you remember back to part 1 of our discussion regarding the fine pens, I talked about the Wheaties premiums that were being issued in 1934, and the fact that both National Chicall and Goudey were watching the success that Wheaties was having with those premiums. So in 1935, Goudey made their first experiment with a premium set by issuing a 24 card set featuring all players from the American League. The first set featured a borderless design. These are what's known today as the Type 3 wide pens. And then after that, they issued the same checklist of cards with the bordered design that would become the standard for all the other wide pen type issues. Most of the catalog designations consider these type 3 and type 2 being 2 individual distinct sets. However, I'm questioning whether that's really the case, that Goudey released 2 exact sets with different designs. What I really believe probably happened is that Goudey designed the set, released it, and then midway through decided they wanted to do a bit of a design revamp and redesigned the card by adding the border to the design and slightly adjusting the cropping of the photos, and just continued to distribute the set with that revamped design. So it's a little bit ambiguous there whether those should be considered one set with 2 variations for each card, or if it would be 2 distinct sets. Most people kind of just classify them as 2 distinct sets, but really I do think it's one set with 2 variations. But in the end, I guess it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So those were the first attempt for a premium set in 1935. And so 1936 was the year Goudey decided they were going all in with premiums, and they made the Type 1 wide pens that were released that year the primary focus of their baseball products for that year, with a 120 card set, which, unlike their competitor competitor's product from National Chikal. Nearly all of the cards issued in the wide pen set are of individual player poses. There are a handful of multiplayer poses mixed in as well, and there are no action shots. And while there are a few players that do have their names misspelled in the facsimile signatures, it is not nearly as prevalent as it was in the National Chikal set. And with the expansion of the set from 24 in 1935 to 120 in 1936, this set did include players from both the National and the American League instead of just the American League. Now, while most of the premiums from the wide pen issue are individual poses, one of the most significant cards from that issue is a multi-person pose, which features Joe DiMaggio in his 1936 rookie season, along with his manager, Joe McCarthy. So Joe DiMaggio appears in both the 1936 National Chikal Fine Pen and in the Goudey Wide Pen premium issues. His Fine Pen premium features him in his PCL Seals uniform playing in a minor league game, while his Goudey Wide Pen issue does feature him in his Yankee uniform. The presence of the Yankee pinstripes seems to have outweighed the allure of an action photo and has made his wide pen premium slightly more prestigious and desirable to collectors, although both are quite significant for having been issued during his rookie season. So what today is known as the Goudey Wide Pen Type 1 is actually the third rendition of this product. The Type 1 premiums have the border that was added with the revamp of the 35 premium set design, and also an additional feature, a notation in the bottom lower border that says Litho USA. That Litho USA notation only appears on the Type 1 of the wide pens. Now, there is actually a variation of Hall of Famer Lloyd Warner's card where it is found with the Litho USA label and without. Lloyd Warner is the only one where this variation is known to exist, but Lloyd is only found in the Type 1 set, so if you come across a wide pen of him either with or without that Litho USA notation, it is still a Type 1 card, and it doesn't seem to be a scarcity either way. Both seem to be found in approximately even quantities. And another differentiating feature from the Type 1 premiums is the cardstock. In the original 1935 issues, the cardstock was a bit of an off-white, slightly grayish cardstock, while the 1936 Type 1s, the paper stock used was more of a true brighter white color. While the differences in the cardstocks can be a little bit hard to differentiate between when looking at them one at a time, anytime you're able to see different types of these cards with the different cardstocks, the Type 1 cardstock is very apparent compared to the cardstock of the other types. Now, very late in 1936, the Canadian division of the Goudey Gum Company, known as Worldwide Gum, you can kind of think of the relationship between Goudey and Worldwide Gum as being similar to Topps and OPC, where they have the same parent companies and they are issuing sets that have a lot of similarities but are actually their own unique and distinct set. Worldwide Gum decided to create a smaller version of the same type of premium set. The set they created would feature 39 9 Canadian players that were members of the International League, and would also include 8 players from the Detroit Tigers, which would have had the largest following of any team within their distribution area. This Canadian version of the wide pens is what's today known as the Type 5, or sometimes called the Canadian wide pens. These Type 5 premiums are the only type to include players from the International League. So players from that International League are easily identified as Type 5 issues. This Canadian Type 5 issue has the same border design as the Type 1s. However, it does not include the litho in USA notation in the bottom border, and the card stock is more of a light cream color to it. Also, as opposed to the other types in this catalog designation, the photos have a matte finish instead of a glossy finish, which gives a bit more of kind of a washed out or faded look. Now, these Type 5 premiums are very rare and extremely difficult to find, and I believe that they were probably only available for distribution for rather short period late in the 1936 season. Now, the final wide pen issue, the Type 4s, were distributed in 1937, and it's unclear whether these were distributed by Goudey or if they were possibly distributed by Worldwide Gum. In 1937, by this point, National Chikal had gone bankrupt, and there was no longer any competition from them, and it appears that Goudey had decided that the large premiums and the large card sets that they had been doing in the past were just too expensive, and so once again the premium set was scaled down. In this year, the set would be reduced again to only 25 cards. The card stock was again changed, and this time the card stock had more of a creamy colored shade to it, and so these Type 4 cards have more of a yellowish tint than the other types within the set. It does have the glossy photo finish as well, and players from both the American and National Leagues are represented in the set. While this 1937 set only included 25 players, 3 are extremely significant, including rookie season issues for Bobby Doerr and Bob Feller, as well as a card for Joe DiMaggio, once again one of the very first collectibles featuring him in only his second major league season. Now, with 5 different types of cards all under one catalog umbrella, you might think that it would be really difficult to tell exactly which type an individual card belongs to, but for the most part it isn't all that difficult, as there isn't a whole lot of crossover between players that appear in one type and those that appear in another type. And so normally, just by a quick examination of the checklist, you can normally differentiate whether it is a Type 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Really, the one exception is Hank Greenberg, who is the only player that appears on all 5 types, and even then, types 1, 2, 3 are easily identifiable based on the either litho USA notation or the presence of the border, but a Type 4 and a Type 5 can be a little bit difficult to differentiate between, in which case, if you can compare the Greenberg to another Type 4 card, known Type 4 card, if it's a Type 5, it should be just slightly longer in length than the Type 4, and the finish to the photo should be a little bit more dull and washed out in appearance due to the matte finish as opposed to a glossy finish. If it matches the length of the Type 4 card, then it should also be a Type 4 card. So those can be the best ways to try and differentiate to whether it would be the not extremely uncommon Type 4 or being the extremely rare Type 5. So there you have it. That is the full discussion there on the National Chicall fine pens and the Goudey Wide pens. Both of these sets offer a lot to the collector looking to get into collecting pre-war baseball, and if you're looking to be able to acquire examples of Hall of Fame players from that 1930s era and be able to acquire them at a much more affordable price than a lot of the gum issue cards of the 1930s, both these sets give you the opportunity to do that. Once again, condition is a significant factor, as there just are not very many high-grade examples of any of these premiums available to be found. Ones that are likely were never circulated. At any given time on eBay, you can find a number of examples of the National Chicall fine pens or Goudey Wide pens Type 1s and Type 4s. Type 2 and 3 may take a little bit of a hunting, and Type 5 would be extremely rare and difficult to find, and you won't see them very often at all. But if you're interested in trying with the Type 1s or the Type 4s, for sure, you can easily find multiple copies of just about any players in the checklist. Unfortunately, you are going to be dealing with a lot of condition issues due to the thin stock. They're oftentimes going to have wrinkles and creases in that thin stock, and pen holes and tape marks and scrapbook damage. All of these things are going to be quite common. However, they do have unique photo images for nearly all of the major stars of this era, which in my opinion makes them very compelling and very enjoyable to acquire. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I'll be trying to do some more on other sets from the vintage era, either pre-war or possibly post-war. If there's a particular set or type of issue that you'd like to hear me talk about, certainly send me a suggestion. I'd be happy to try and share what I know, or maybe answer questions that you might have about it. So I hope you've all enjoyed this, and I look forward to talking to you again